Welcome to Focus, Faith, and Fueling, the Winning Edge podcast, where young athletes, parents, and coaches learn how mindset, nutrition, and faith work together to elevate performance, resilience, and overall health. What you eat and how you think can elevate and transform your game. If you're ready to gain a true mental edge, fuel your body with purpose, and stay grounded in what truly matters, then this podcast is for you. We are your hosts. I'm Lindsay, former collegiate athlete, author, coach, and educational coach for over 20 years, and a mom to two young athletes. And I'm Stacy, sports dietitian, author, speaker, and nutritional consultant for over 19 years, and a mom of two teen athletes. Today's guest is one of the world's foremost experts on obesity and weight management. Dr. James Hill is a professor in the Department of Nutrition Sciences at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, where he also serves as the director of the NIH-funded Nutrition Obesity Research Center. With over 40 years of research experience, Dr. Hill has dedicated his career to understanding how obesity develops, its impact on our health, and the best strategies to prevent and maintain a healthy weight. He has published more than 650 scientific papers, co-founded the National Weight Control Registry, and was elected to the prestigious National Academy of Medicine in 2014. He's also an author of multiple books for the general public, including his newest release, Losing the Weight Loss Meds, which we'll talk about today. Please welcome Dr. James Hill. Dr. Hill, thank you so much for being on with us this morning. I'm so excited to get you to share just the wealth of knowledge and information that you have for over 40 years of research in this space.
Yeah, it's been a long time, but I'm looking forward to it, Stacy. I'm old.
Well, so wise, I would say, and knowledgeable in this space. So you spent decades studying obesity and weight management. What drew you to this field and what keeps you excited about it?
Well, when I started out, no one really cared about obesity because obesity rates were very low. So I was really interested in how the body regulated body weight. And I remember saying, I'm studying why so many people stay at a constant weight across their lifetime.
Yeah.
Okay. That was the case back then. Now it's very different. So when I saw that obesity rates started rising, and we recognized that in maybe in the mid 1980s, it's like, wait, hold on, there's something interesting going on here. So it was sort of following a thread for me. And I realized that people weren't maintaining constant weight anymore. People were gradually gaining weight.
That's fascinating. Well, and I think this is why I'm so excited to have you share sort of what you've learned with our listeners. I mean, you've published over 600 scientific articles. Is that number right?
It's a little higher, but it's roughly
Oh my
that.
gosh. Okay. That's a lot of articles. And you co-founded the National Weight Control Registry, which is really
Yeah.
the longest kind of running study
Yeah.
understanding people who've lost weight and kept the weight off, which is just an amazing, group of individuals that we're able to look at and study and research. Looking back, you've had a long career. What are you most proud of? What's your most impactful contribution?
One of the things I'm most proud of is that I was able to change over time. When I first started out, I thought the problem in people that didn't maintain a weight was they had a low energy expenditure. I looked at that. I found out they didn't. Then I said, well, it must be something behavioral. They must be eating too much. Then it became the environment. So I think I've been able to change as I developed hypotheses, found they weren't correct, and moved on to other hypotheses. And now I think we understand all of these play a role. It's really the interaction of our biology and our environment that's causing the real problem.
I want to sit here and unpack that a little bit more because I think even as a dietitian, I've only been practicing for almost 20 years and so much has changed. When I first learned about nutrition, it was so much focus on calories in, calories out, and exercise more than you intake. And can you just unpack what you just shared with our listeners a little bit about how has the really research landscape on obesity throughout your career shifted or changed? What did you think you knew that really wasn't true?
Yeah, I thought I was going to find a defect in physiology that caused people to become overweight and obese. And there are a few people who have that. But for most people, that's not the case. For most people, your physiology is working perfectly. What
Yeah.
has changed is your environment. When your environment changes so that food is everywhere, it's very tasty, served in large portions, and you basically engineer movement out of your life, the way your physiology responds is by gaining weight. That's not that anything's wrong with your physiology. Your physiology is responding perfectly to an environment that it's in. So if you look at most of our history, most of mankind's history, we struggled to get enough food, and we
Yeah.
had to be physically active to get food and everything. And so from a genetic point of view, we were geared to save energy and to rest when we didn't need to be physically active. And as the environment changed, now there's food everywhere and we can rest all the time. So
Yeah.
what I've learned, it's not that our biology went wrong, it's that our environment went wrong. But what is interesting, Stacy, is now the new medications are actually changing that biology in a very different way. And I think this is fascinating. And by the way, I think the new medications are fabulous, but they're not really correcting a problem. They're actually changing normal physiology so that we work better in the environment we're in. And that is such an interesting situation.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. So we're going to dig into GLP-1s, which is the medications you're really
Right.
talking about. And maybe for listeners who are just hearing about GLP-1s, can you give us in plain kind of explanation language, what is a GLP-1? What do they do? And why are they such a game changer for the environment that
Yeah,
someone's in?
GLP-1 is made in your intestine, and it's a satiety signal. So normally your intestine makes GLP-1, goes to your brain and tells you that you're full, right?
Yeah.
But it just hits your receptors and it's sort of a small effect. What the pharmaceutical companies have done is to make a medication. It's not GLP-1, but it hits those GLP-1 receptors in the brain. And unlike regular GLP-1, which stays on those receptors just a very short period of time, these medications stay on those receptors and amplify the satiety signal. So basically, the medications go to your brain and tell you that you're full and you don't need to eat. And that's a long lasting effect. And what we see is people taking these medications eat somewhere around a third fewer calories than they would normally eat. And that produces a lot of weight loss.
Yeah. Well, so talk about that a little bit. And that's good for, I think, the environment you talked about where food is in surplus. It's really everywhere. We're not exercising as
Mm.
much. But are there places where that's a risk for individuals to be taking a GLP-1, or kind of what are you seeing in this space? Like, it's exciting, but it also that might come with some of its own challenges, right?
You're exactly right. And again, I think these medications are game changers. They're wonderful tools, but they're not the answer in and of itself. So there are a couple of issues. Number one, if you're eating a third fewer calories, you have serious risk of nutritional deficiencies. Okay. Protein, fiber, vitamins, minerals, and we're seeing these nutritional deficiencies. So just taking the medications, you're going to produce the weight loss, and you're probably going to lose weight no matter what you eat. You can eat a crappy diet and still lose weight, but you may suffer from some of these nutritional deficiencies. So one problem is it takes the focus on how much you eat to the quality of what you eat. And I think you're going to see more and more advice that if you're going to eat less, you have to make all of those calories count. You need to be
Yeah.
nutritionally dense. The other thing is when we look at the National Weight Control Registry and see people that are keeping their weight off, in most cases, they're keeping their weight off by being very physically active with a high energy expenditure and a high food intake. With the
Yeah.
medications, it's the opposite. You're actually maintaining your weight on a lower food intake and a lower energy expenditure. which is fine as long as you're taking the medications. But as soon as if you stop the medications, now you have a low energy expenditure. Now your appetite comes back. And that's why what we see is when people stop the medications without a plan, and we can talk about that,
Yeah.
they very quickly regain the weight. And it is so sad to see people who lose 25, 30, 35% of their body weight, and they feel wonderful and they're great, and they stop the medication and it comes back and they end up where they were before.
Yeah. And I want to talk about this. I want to talk about the book that you co authored of losing the weight loss meds, because I do believe this can be done. But I want to back up a little bit because I think we've framed GLP-1s as good versus bad. Are they good? Are they bad? And I think they can be useful in some environments. I
Yeah.
worked several years in an endocrine clinic, and I was so fortunate. I got treated like a resident by the doctor who worked there as a dietitian. And one of the things I saw very early on is these drugs were really powerful in helping give people their quality of life back. But as a dietitian, I see a lot of what you're talking about, Dr. Hill, where what happens is they're eating a lot fewer calories. They don't feel like exercising, so they're not exercising. Their basal metabolic rate decreases because they're eating less and they're not exercising. Our
Right,
listeners know this from what we've talked about with REDS. And then on top of that, every bite has to count even more.
right.
Every piece of food they put in has to be even more nutrient dense because they're more at risk for micronutrient deficiencies like you talked about. And we talk a lot, we talk with athletes, we talk with adult athletes about how important maintaining lean muscle mass is for health.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that for our GLP-1 users and like the risk? I mean, anytime you lose weight, you're going to lose lean muscle mass, but can you kind of talk about
Yeah.
nutritionally
And
what you do?
And first of all, to the first part of your question, Stacy, I talk to a lot of my MD friends who treat obesity, and they talk about, I am really loving it. For the first time, I actually feel like I can help my patients.
Yes.
And so that's the good part. When you lose weight, some of that weight loss, most of it is fat, and that's a good thing. You want to lose fat, but some of it comes from non fat tissue, which part of that is muscle. And so it's natural. However, you lose weight, you're going to lose some muscle because when you gain weight, you gain more muscle. With the GLP-1 medications, the question is, are you losing more muscle than you would anticipate from the weight loss? And that question is still unanswered. And it really has focused a lot more research on muscle. And some people are saying, yes, you lose muscle, but the quality of the muscle that remains is higher. So the muscle you're losing may be the less functional muscle. So
Wow.
this is still an issue. You don't want to lose muscle. Believe me, anything you can do to keep muscle is a good thing. You're going to lose some on the GLP-1 medications. And the question is, are you losing more than expected? And then the other question is, what can you do about it? And the best thing that we know right now to preserve muscle is a combination of higher protein intake and resistance exercise. Protein alone won't do it. You need exercise as the stimulus to use protein to translate into muscle.
Yeah, I thank you for saying that because I think that's a big thing we often miss is that diet is important, but diet and exercise are kind of like socks and shoes. If you have one without the other, you're going to have stinky feet. And to truly spur muscle synthesis, we have to have exercise. So I love that you hit on that point. We definitely need
Well,
protein, but we need exercise.
in the National Weight Control Registry, I think it was like 94% of these people are keeping their weight off with a lot of exercise.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm convinced that exercise is critical for long term weight loss maintenance. And I think that's going to be true with the medications as well. The medications, the reduced food intake's doing a lot of the effort. But I think if it's one thing I could recommend to people on the meds, don't forget the exercise because exercise can do so many other things to help in weight maintenance and help in overall health.
Yeah, I love that. Talk a little bit more about protein. Protein's all the buzz, and we hear all about protein. And
Yeah.
we are seeing for folks on GLP-1 medications that their protein requirements or thresholds could be, and I heard a researcher say yesterday, up to 2.4 grams per kilogram body weight. Can you kind of talk about what you're seeing in those ranges when someone's on the medication and then when they transition off the medication?
Yeah, so protein, I think is very important. When you're eating less calories, you risk not getting enough protein. And I think the one thing we've actually done is to focus people's attention on the need for more protein. And
Yeah.
again, we debate how much protein. One of the good things about protein is it's fairly safe. You would have to go really, really high before you would get any negative consequences. Your body gets rid of it, it doesn't need it. And so I think the focus on protein is a really, really good thing. But again, as we said, protein alone isn't going to affect it without the exercise. But the other thing that protein does is to increase satiety. So protein actually makes you feel full, maybe more so than some of the other nutrients, which is particularly important if you stop the medications. Because before the medications, it's sort of like your appetite is high, right? Maybe too high. And you go on the medications, now it comes down low. When you stop the medications, the tendency is going to go back to where it was. What we want to help people do is to say, yes, it's going to come back. Let's help it come back not quite to the level it was before. And protein intake is one of the things that can increase satiety. And so a higher protein is important both while you're on the medication, but it's also particularly important if you stop the medications to avoid regaining the weight.
Yeah. I want to dig into the book a little bit more now. But before I ask you questions on sort of the learnings in the book, tell me a little bit about why the book. Why was this topic so important to you? I mean, I guess you've dedicated your career to this space and you were seeing folks who had, to your point, lost a lot of weight, gotten their life back, and then tried to get off of the medications and really seen that reverse. Can you talk a little bit about the why? And then also hit on, what the book really hits at, which is
Yeah.
without a plan, the weight almost
Yeah.
always comes back. And biologically, why does that happen?
So I've been very, very interested in weight loss maintenance with the National Weight Control Registry, et cetera. But here's the problem has been nobody really wanted to talk about weight loss maintenance. So we've helped people do weight loss for decades, and people would always say, which we would want to talk about weight loss maintenance, and they would say, yeah, when I lose another 5 or 10 or 15 pounds, I'll talk about weight loss maintenance because they just wanted to talk about weight loss.
Yeah.
And behaviorally, I'm a behaviorist, but behaviorally, we couldn't produce enough weight to make people happy. We would go out and get excited if we produced 10% weight. Well, they wanted a 20% weight. So
Isn't that human nature?
it's human nature, but the medications are wonderful because now they're doing the heavy lifting on weight loss. So it's like finally people are ready to hear about weight loss maintenance. So we felt, my co-author Holly White and I, we felt like finally the time is right to write a book around weight loss maintenance because people are hitting their goals. The other reason is we saw so many people go on the meds, successfully lose weight, and for various reasons stop the meds, and weight comes back, and they're right back where they started. And it's like, okay, we can help people. We know a lot about weight loss maintenance. We can help people, and we are not advocating stopping the drugs. If you're on the drugs are working well, you feel good, there is no reason you can't take these chronically. But for a lot of reasons, people have to or want to stop the medications. And so in the book, we talk about 3 pillars. Everybody focuses on nutrition, and Stacy, nutrition is terribly important, but nutrition alone won't do it.
Agreed.
The uh, the other 2 pillars are, you'll be surprised at this one, physical activity.
Oh,
You gotta, if you're
no
not
brainer.
going to increase your physical activity, you're not going to keep your weight off. And the third one is one that I ignored for most of my career, and I believe now it's the most important of them all, and we call it mind state. A little
Fun.
bit different from mindset, but we talk about using food as medicine, physical activity is medicine, and your mind is medicine. And your mind is medicine may be the real key to success. And in the book, we call it a playbook. We go through the science and tell you why you have to eat for satiety, why you have to increase your physical activity, and why you have to work on your mind state. But then we put it into place. Here are ways to take the science and translate it. And it's not one size fits all. So we give you different plays and say, try them, see what works for you. It may not work for someone else. And so we see the book as a transition, transitioning from the meds to keeping the weight off. And then we talk about, the other thing that's near and dear to my heart is when people start out, all they focus on is weight loss. But the number on the scale is not really what we're after. The
Mm.
number on the scale doesn't make us happy. It doesn't make your spouse kinder or your boss treat you better. You're after a quality of life. And so in
Yeah.
the book, we talk about, yes, keeping the weight off is a good thing, but you also need to work on other aspects of your life. We talk about, living large in your life and looking at relationships and all these other things. And so the medications can be the stimulus that gets the weight off. That isn't what's going to make you happy. What's going to make you happy is keeping the weight off, but working on all these other things that allow you to not just increase your health, but also increase your happiness.
Oh, I love this. I don't know if you know this, but SPAN as an acronym stands for, and this is what we work with our young athletes and their families, a performance mindset and nutrition, like full lifestyle, because all these things are interconnected. And so I love that your book covers that. A great resource for anyone who's thinking about or who's had to transition off the medications. But I want to back us up because I think this is also important in what you've learned in your career. Can you talk about it's important to have a plan if you're needing to transition off, but can you talk about biologically, why does it happen that most people gain the weight back? Can you kind of talk about that physiologically, biologically, what happens when they come off of these medications?
Yeah, the main thing that happens is the medications work by making you full on less food. So you're eating 30% less, but you're perfectly happy. You're not hungry. The food noise goes away. The idea of this constant thinking about food goes away. So, number one, you're not hungry. Number two, you have no food noise. And people are like, wow, this is wonderful. Now you go off the medications, the food noise comes back, and now your hunger comes back.
Yeah.
That's the real problem. The other thing that we talk about is if your physical activity is low, it sets you up for rapid regain. You don't have any sort of protection against that weight regain. So in the book, we talk about if you're thinking of going off the medications, prepare for that. Here's what's going to happen to your appetite and food noise. Here's what your low physical activity is going to mean. And here's what we call the suboptimum mind state is going to do when you stop the medications. The
Yeah.
medications work on food, but the physical activity and the mind state is something you can work on yourself and prepare for keeping your weight off if you stop the meds.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the biology of what happens when you are physically active and like what's a non-negotiable amount of physical activity these folks would need?
Yeah. So again, what people think of in physical activity is burning calories. But it also, we've dived much deeper into how it affects metabolism.
Yeah.
People would come to us years ago and say, I'm overweight because my metabolism is broken. And we would measure their energy expenditure and it was perfectly fine. And so we thought, no, your metabolism isn't broken. Well, we were looking in the wrong place. There's a concept called metabolic flexibility. And
Yeah.
it's a complex term, but it basically means, Stacy, if you're metabolically flexible, your body is really good about burning the kind of fuel that's available. If you're not, it's not good at that. And metabolic flexibility is one of the things that contributes to overweight and staying overweight. And the best thing you can do to increase your metabolic flexibility is increase your physical activity. So if you're metabolically flexible, and you overeat, you're going to store just a little less of that excess than if you're not metabolically flexible. And over time, we're constantly eating excesses. And so this is burning calories is important, but this concept of metabolic flexibility is even more important because your metabolism is working with you to maintain your weight rather than against you.
Yeah. I want to sit here for a minute because this is an important part of why I think over time you've seen a lot of patients struggle or cycle with weight and they get to a state where they're not metabolically flexible. And then just a tiny bit of surplus calories, it starts to just
Yes.
compound and it creates this vicious cycle that people feel like they can't get out from under, which is where these drugs I have seen in my time as a dietitian have been so powerful to just give them that walk back to metabolic flexibility if they're doing what you're saying, which is all the right things to be able to sustain that. But can
That's
you
right.
talk a little bit about metabolic set points? We hear
Yeah.
that like, your body wants you to be at this certain weight. Talk about what you know as a leading researcher in this space. Like, what is a metabolic set point, and like, how can it be reset?
Yeah, so the concept of metabolic set point is that there's a weight dialed in your brain that your body wants to be, okay? And when you go below that, your body wants to get back up to it. When you go above it, your body wants to get back to it. Um, I think it's hard to justify a total set point theory with the fact that people are gaining weight over time. If there were a set point, why is everybody gaining a little bit of weight? I prefer the term settling point, is that basically think of a big pot where you throw in your genetics, your behavior, your environment, and you end up at a weight that remains stable as long as those other things remain
Okay.
stable. And so, for example, if you start exercising, well, that's going to change your settling point because you've disrupted one of those things that affect your level of weight.
Okay. So, really, when you think about energy balance, talk a little bit because we talk about this to our listeners. There's multiple things that kind of compound to get us to energy balance. Can you
Yeah.
break those down a little bit more as we think about this, like settling point? You kind of talked about them, but I want you to dig in a little bit more if you don't mind.
So, energy balance at one level, people say it's really simple, calories in, calories out, and the difference is your change in body weight. Well, it sounds simple, but there are so many things that affect all of those, and the components aren't independent. So, if you change your food intake, your energy expenditure responds. If you change your energy expenditure, your food intake responds. So, I was once introduced as someone that spent my whole career studying this simple equation of intake and expenditure, and it isn't simple. I think energy balance, it simply describes what happens in food through the body. You take in food, you expend that, the difference is going to affect your body weight. But there are so many factors, environmental, behavioral, genetics, that affect each component: food intake, energy expenditure, and body weight. And it's where I've learned through the National Weight Control Registry that if your energy expenditure is sufficiently low, as most people in America have such a low energy expenditure because we don't need to move very much. Biologically, it's impossible for most people to eat sufficiently little food to maintain that low energy expenditure. And again, if you look at our history, we've always been physically active. And so, if you look at post World War II, for example, I think physical activity gradually came down and down and down, and food intake probably adjusted somewhat. But then you reach a low level at which you just can't eat that few
Yeah.
calories. And that's what starts the weight gain. And so, again, saying energy balance is simple is wrong. It's the foundation, but it isn't a theory and it doesn't tell us what to do. It's just a way of understanding where we can manipulate the system.
Yeah, I love that. We talk a lot to our athletes, to our families about sort of this, like you have your basal metabolic rate, the calories you burn if you just sat up in bed every single day. You have the calories you burn from physical activity. You have the calories that you burn based on what your body mass is made up of. So we talk about the importance of muscle and how muscle is really effective at helping us burn calories.
Well,
And then we also talk about the thermogenic effect of food, which I think is
yes,
fascinating in this space.
yes.
And so, is there anything you would share with listeners kind of on those things make up
Well,
calories in, calories out?
One of the things I'm glad you brought up the athletes because I've been very interested in elite athletes, high level athletes. And if you look at the dietary guidelines and look at elite athletes, they're eating way more sugar, way more everything
Yes.
than we said. And one of my friends studied Tour de France athletes, and these people were just consuming massive amounts of sugar and calories, no metabolic disease. So again, I'm not saying we can all be athletes, but the more you can approach that high level of physical activity, number one, the more fun you can have with your diet. If you're have a
It's true.
low level of physical activity, you've got to be careful in what you eat and make sure you get enough nutrients. The more physical activity you do, the more leeway you have to have some fun in your diet, still get adequate nutrition. And so again, we can't all be elite athletes, but the further away from the sedentary state we can be, the easier it's going to be to maintain a healthy weight.
Yeah, no, I love this, Dr. Hill, and just hitting home on this. This is a big thing I see that there's a lot of confusion around, even for parents. Parents will come and they're trying to restrict the sugar intake or the salt intake of their young, very busy athlete. And in some places, can that be okay? Yes, overall, but in some places, they need those carbohydrates to be able to fuel their workout.
I
And
think
we
our
eat out of
dietary
them.
guide we should have different dietary guidelines based on level of activity. Because if
Preach.
you're active, you have an active kid or you're an active athlete, the dietary guidelines do not necessarily apply to you. The dietary guidelines more and more are aimed toward a sedentary overweight population. If you're an athlete, you have so much more leeway. And for kids, if your kid or teenager is an athlete, I think you have to worry less about restricting those kinds of things because the high energy expenditure is more powerful than almost anything you're going to do on the diet side.
Well, and I see this so much with our young athletes. And we talked about this a little bit, Dr. Hill. Parents go on a GLP-1, they stop shopping, they're not bringing home as many carbohydrates. And this young athlete might be burning 4,500 calories a day. And they're trying to put their child on a high protein, low carbohydrate diet. And that's the opposite of what this young athlete really needs at their time period, season
Yeah,
of their.
I worry a lot about that because I don't think it's the time to restrict. And the other thing for women, they're developing bone density at that time. And if you're restricting calories or even on the GLP-1 medications, it can be long-lasting effects because you're never going to reach your maximum bone density. It's really an issue. And again, I understand parents on the GLP-1s may want to change a lot of things, but I am so convinced of the importance of high levels of physical activity that I think if your child is moving a lot, is an athlete, I think you have to worry a lot less about nutrition. And certainly, restriction can be a negative period. Most of the athletes at the high levels are going to regulate pretty well in terms of calories. Make sure they have healthy options available. But I think it's a mistake to try to be restrictive in those situations.
Yeah, and that's one big thing we really focus on is get more nutrient dense foods in all the places. Really work on having a more healthful food environment. And, that's one of the big things we're doing with our food health app that we recently launched is just trying to help people not be so afraid of food, but to really think about food as if you can engineer, to your point early on in the conversation, Dr. Hill, just a food environment that has really healthy, nutrient dense foods, and you can listen to your body, be mindful, your body really does tell you some powerful things as it's helping you kind of manage and regulate appetite and health.
I think we're having to think of nutrition very differently. I mean, let's face it, for the past decades, people have sought nutrition for weight management. That's the reason
Yeah.
that we choose foods and everything. Now we have the medications that are going to do that. The medications are going to help most people. Some people don't respond, but for most people, the medications will produce the weight loss. Now, nutrition has a different role. You don't need it for weight loss, but you need it to optimize
Yes.
health. And I think the food industry is seeing that, and I think they're struggling to look at how they produce foods that are more nutrient dense, and I think this can help everybody.
Well, and I love it. 12 years as a retail dietitian, and I saw how we engineered foods and how we marketed it. I think it's really powerful. And this is when I think about nutrition, I think about, I talk to my athletes about what it can do for you to enhance performance and like optimize health. And there are such powerful ways that when we think about these foods, we can really engineer foods that have really powerful
Uh,
implications to performance and health. And so that's exciting for me, actually.
Yeah, I oftentimes use the car analogy, Stacy, is that most people are like the Volkswagen Bug, they just they have a poor metabolism and poor fuel. But you take the high-end cars, they're gonna perform well no matter what. But you put
Uh,
good fuel in them, they really perform well. And that's the
yes.
athlete. Athletes are, if you're an athlete, I'm not worried about it. You're doing pretty well. But if you can optimize your nutrition on top of that, that's the way that you go to that next level.
That's right. We talk a lot, omega-3 research, and we share with our athletes just optimizing recovery and performance. And there are levers you can pull on that really
A-
enhance.
Absolutely. And with the high levels of activity, you have some time for indulgent foods too. You don't have to give up ice cream and some of the things that are treats that you can have
Yes.
occasionally. Whereas people on low levels of activity, they have to worry about all this.
But you make such a great point, though, because a friend of mine actually runs a program called The Athletes Come Back. And I think one of the challenging things I see is when young athletes don't understand the power of their physical activity and optimizing sort of their food environment. This whole group that he runs is for ex athletes who've gained a ton of weight. And to your point, because they stopped exercising and they continued eating like they were eating when they were a competitive athlete. And so it's just so powerful to think about the role of physical activity in kind of what happened
And
there.
And that's very similar to the meds. So you stop the meds, you have a low energy expenditure, appetite comes back, weight gain, just like the ex-athletes.
So, to wrap us up as I think about this, so for someone who's on a GLP-1, if their doctor has recommended stopping or if they're wanting to stop, what is the advice that you would give on what's the first thing they should do?
So one of the first things is I would have a plan for stopping before you stop. Okay.
I love
Some
that.
people don't have that luxury. You lose insurance or you have to do it. But
Yeah.
if you have the option, think about it. And in the book, we say, here's what's going to happen. When you stop the meds, appetite's going to come back, food noise is going to come back. If your physical activity is low, you're going to struggle to keep the weight off. If you don't have the right mind state approach, you're not going to be able to get through and actualize on this plan. So you can think about these before you stop, and you can work on the physical activity and the mind state while you're on the meds and prepare for what's going to happen when you stop them. Now, the good part is the meds stay around for a while. So when you stop them, it's not as if the next day your appetite's going to come back. You have a little bit of time to do it, but you have to prepare for that. You are going to eat more. You just don't want to go back to the level you were before. But with the increase in physical activity, with eating for satiety, and with thinking about what we call avoid your mind state, many, many people can succeed. And the other thing we talk about is long term. Because we see this is an important one, Stacy. We see people
Mhm.
in the National Weight Control Registry. My colleague Holly Wyatt says, if you're keeping your weight off and you're just out there hanging by your fingernails, it ain't gonna work. You're
Yeah.
gonna lose in the long run. What people in the National Weight Control Registry have done is they've adopted these lifestyle changes and they've become a positive part of their life. And
Yeah.
what we talk about is when you switch over, it may be hard at first, but we show people through changing your environment, changing your habits and your routines, you get to the point where you actually like it. You
Yeah.
like your new lifestyle because if you don't, you're not going to maintain it.
Yeah, I love that. And we talk a lot to our athletes, to our parents about just all of the pillars that impact lifestyle, not just nutrition. We talk about exercise, nutrition, sleep, social connection. We talk about substance abuse and all of the things that, because all of these things are connected. I do want to ask you a question, though, that's been on my mind. Given your 40 years of research, sleep's role. Can you talk about that on maintaining health? What do you see in the National Registry with those that have been able to maintain weight? Is sleep important to them?
Yeah, when we collected most of the information with the National Weight Control Registry, we didn't get a lot of information about sleep. But I will say that the research on sleep, in my mind, shows that it's absolutely critical. And we talk about that as part of contributing to a healthy mind state in the book. If you're
Love that.
not sleeping well, it affects your energy expenditure and it affects your food intake. Studies have shown that when you sleep deprived people, they make poor food choices. We also know it disrupts your energy expenditure when you don't sleep well. And I think it really affects your mental energy and so forth. So of our three pillars, food, physical activity, mind state, poor sleep affects all those negatively. And those three all interact. And if you affect one negatively, they can affect the others. So I think sleep is critical for healthy weight maintenance.
I love that. So you cover it in the book. So definitely, if our
Yes.
listeners are thinking about going off of a GLP-1, check out Losing the Weight Loss Meds book, which is really, really important. What other ways can someone who's trying to create a plan to get off, what other ways can they find the book or follow any of your work that you're doing?
Yeah, so the book is available. It's called Losing the Weight Loss Meds. It's available anywhere you buy books, Amazon, whatever bookstores. What Holly and I, my colleague is Dr. Holly Wyatt, who's an endocrinologist who works with me. The book is sort of the what to do, giving people specific advice. What we're trying to do is to develop other materials to help people. You know, it's like taking a class. You've got the textbook, and the textbook, for some people is all you need, but for most people, they need help and support. And so we're in the process of developing a platform to help people in every stage of their weight journey, whether they're thinking about losing weight, whether they're losing weight, whether they're in early maintenance, whether they're in long term maintenance. So,
Yeah.
what we want to do is to create more help for people in every aspect of their weight journey. And so,
Yeah.
stay tuned. We are hopefully going to have some more information out there soon.
I love that. As someone who left an endocrinology clinic, then went to work for a retailer and built a dietitian program to help consumers make choices, and is now working in food tech to make those choices even easier. I love the work that you're doing, Dr. Hill, and I'm just so grateful for your time this morning. One last question before I leave. What's next for your research? Besides the platform, is there anything else exciting on the cutting edge we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, for me, the GLP-1 meds are wonderful, and I can't tell you, I'm so happy as a behaviorist. I welcome these. The real frontier now is weight loss maintenance. And so we have the book on how to keep weight off if you stop the meds. But what about people on the meds? Because you aren't going to lose weight forever. And this is
Right.
actually something people don't understand. If you stay on the meds, you're eventually going to reach a new equilibrium. We know nothing about optimizing health while you're on the meds, but you're not losing weight anymore. So the exciting part for me is now we're focusing on getting serious about understanding weight loss maintenance. And we're understanding people are different. So we talk about precision approaches to this. We have to individualize it. I think this is some exciting research that's going to come along in the next few years.
Yeah, I love this. Thank you so much. And I'm excited to follow that. We will link all of your book. And as you get the platform ready to launch, I would love to share that with our listeners as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time. This has been such a pleasure.
Stacy,
And
this is fun. I love to talk about this, but for people that are really working to manage the weight, I think the future has never been brighter. We don't know everything, but we have new tools, we have new options. I just think it's a very, very exciting time.
it's an exciting and empowering time for anybody who's ever
Yes,
felt really helpless in this space. And I love it too.
absolutely.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
Stay tuned for more real world tips and conversations with coaches, athletic directors, current and former collegiate and professional athletes, sports dietitians, sports psychologists, and other performance experts.
If this episode gave you something to chew on, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe. Nutrition is important, but let's be honest, we've all got to eat. So help us feed this podcast so we can keep fueling you.
Don't forget to join the Span Athletics community to get more exclusive content by following us on all of our social media platforms, including TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and X at @span_athletics.
Until next time, stay faithful, stay fueled, and remain focused on your goals.